Okay, hello everyone. Thanks for being here. I will try and navigate this. Already not doing a great job. Where's Zoom gone? It's a good start. So I'm clicking on that.
Yes, so if you.
Oh, well, sorry, I didn't see that. Okay. Starts me to go on A. Yeah, and then. Okay, great. Brilliant. All good. Thanks all. My name's Ian, and I'm delighted to be presenting this afternoon discussing the importance of lived experience in psychedelic safeguarding. I'm honoured to have been invited to come to speak with you all and to share a bit about my personal journey with psychedelic-assisted therapy and how this led to advocacy work and the formation of the Psychedelic Participant Advocacy Network, or PsyPAN. Sadly, my co-founder, Leonie Schneider, you can see her there, although we should be on the first slide, is unable to be here today, sadly. So I'll be sharing her journey in her own words, as well as trying to channel some of her wisdom during this presentation and Q&A that follows. So I stand here not as an academic or a scientist, but as someone who has directly benefited from these therapies. So this first part will just be a brief introduction, really, to myself, Leonie, PsyPAN, and the work that we do. Okay, we will begin with who we are, and then what PsyPAN is, and what our aims are as an organisation. And this will then be followed by, I don't think we're doing a panel discussion as such. There'll be some pertinent questions that I'll respond to that have been posed already, and then we'll do an audience Q&A afterwards. So, right, let's get on. So, who are we? I'm Ian, and I've struggled with anxiety and depression throughout my life and tried a variety of different medications and therapies, none of which worked longer term, sadly. Having burnt out and broken down in 2014, I searched desperately for alternatives and eventually came across the Imperial College psilocybin for depression pilot study. I was one of 20 people lucky enough to take part in this phase 1 trial, and it proved to be the most effective treatment for my depression to date. I was depression and anxiety free for 3 months before the afterglow gradually wore off. And while it reframed the way I viewed my depression forever, I eventually returned to walking the same old paths in the neural grass. I waited 4 years for another chance to access the treatment that had helped me so much, and took part in the Compass Pathways King's College study, again looking at the effects of psilocybin on depression in 2019, but with very different results. This time there was no afterglow, and my depression returned as the drug wore off. But it still proved to be valuable, as it set me on a different therapeutic path. And while it's still a hard path to walk at times, I've been off antidepressants ever since. And yeah, I just want to share Leonie's story as well in her own words. So this is a direct quote from Leonie. So my experience is similar in some respects, yet different to Ian's. I was first diagnosed with depression in 1998 and have been on almost continuous SSRI use for over 2 decades, with all its unavoidable and well-documented side effects, and with very little long-lasting relief. Initially, the treatment was life-saving and a necessary intervention in an acute crisis, but did nothing to get to the root causes of my recurrent depression. In 2019, I was fortunate enough to participate in the second Imperial College trial, looking at psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression. I weaned off my antidepressants, and the psychedelic experience cracked me open to my pain and invited me into self-compassion, acceptance, and the start of a long healing process. I continued my path of slow and steady healing and have subsequently participated in a small pharma trial in 2022, looking at DMT for major depressive disorder, which provided even deeper insights and an embodied experience of depression. I continue to be unmedicated and doing the hard work. So the effect of these treatments on both my and Leonie's mental health has inspired us to engage in advocacy work since taking part in these trials. And PsyPAN was the logical progression of the work that we'd been doing up to that point. Ultimately, we want to help bring these treatments closer to being available safely to all who may benefit from them. We want to make the trial experience better and help make these medicines more accessible to others. So what is PsyPAN? PsyPAN is an advocacy network set up to connect and empower all participants taking part in psychedelic clinical trials or receiving therapy at legal treatment centres globally. We enable participants to have a strong collective voice and provide consultancy and advocacy services to organisations. We also plan to provide accreditation to these organisations who are going above and beyond to prioritise the best interests of the participant. Okay, so just a little about our aims as well. So we are building a community of participants and looking to create spaces for community peer support. We're pooling participants' lived experiences to create a strong collective participant voice. And this helps to create more effective treatment models, maximise positive treatment outcomes, and shape sector-wide model of best practice where people's safety and well-being is put first. We're working with various key organisations in the field to input the participant voice into their trial design and treatment models. Now, the very fact that both Leonie and I have taken part in 2 medical trials each is an indication that these treatments are not one-dose silver bullet cure-alls. The fact that we and almost all other psychedelic clinical trial participants continue to struggle with our mental health post-dose is also a sign that we need to speak in terms of a programme of treatment, not in terms of a magical elixir to cure depression or other debilitating conditions. This is a narrative and hype that has been adopted by sections of the media and also, understandably, by many of the companies who are tweaking compounds to make their fortunes. I don't need to say this, but as you can understand, this is potentially dangerous. People's hopes are understandably pinned on finding a cure. And as many of these drugs are available elsewhere, either in nature or from a street dealer, this narrative makes people more likely to take matters into their own hands without a safe therapeutic container. The message seems to have gone from these drugs will make you mad to these drugs will make you sane. We need some balance, some nuance, some honesty. These medicines seem to have huge potential, but they are catalysts, not wonder cures. PsyPAN's work can be summed up in the phrase psychedelic safeguarding. We advise and work with organisations to feed into or even co-create trials. The huge wealth of existing participant knowledge and lived experience is used to ensure participant well-being is placed at the heart of every step of the trial or treatment process. This can take the form of consultancy or setting up working groups. We also feed into research, and we're also looking to, as I mentioned earlier, set up peer support groups so that what comes after the trials is also accounted for. It's very, very important what comes after as well. So by doing this, by feeding into future trials, it helps to create a feedback loop where participants are constantly feeding their experiences in to help improve treatments for future participants. We need to ensure organisations aren't just paying lip service to participant welfare or box ticking. Creating a model of best practice and providing accreditation to organisations that are doing their best to meet these standards will help ensure this. It's important to remember that there is no research and therefore no psychedelic-assisted therapy without participants. Without participants, these trials and treatments would not be possible and would not come to market. Ultimately, who are the people these treatments are being provided to help and to heal? This is why participants are the most important part of developing the trial models of these drugs, and once they come to market, helping to maintain the standard of treatments and how they are delivered. So, yeah, we all need to connect, collaborate, work together so that psychedelic-assisted therapy can fulfil its potential safely, sustainably, and equitably. Thank you.
So Thank you so much, Ian. It was great to have this introduction about the work that you're doing and with PsyPAN. And this is really important to have that participant voice. So the next section, we will be looking at some more controversial research and psychedelic research and practice issues. But maybe if you want to tell us a bit more about the journey that you had going into the clinical trial, what was that like for you?
Yeah, happy to do that. It's kind of like trying to sum up my life story. So if I go too long, let me know. But yeah, so as I said at the start, you know, I've lived with anxiety and depression, probably complex PTSD, I found in recent years for most of my adult life. And having been through so many different SSRIs, different talking therapies, trying to find the answer, the fix, that magic thing that's going to finally make you feel better. I ended up going to see my GP. This is probably in about 2014, I think, and he went through various things like sleep and diet and relationships and all of that. And he ended up saying at the end of that, I don't know what else you expect me to be able to do for you, which for anyone that's in a desperate position and has plucked up the courage to go to their GP is the last thing that you want to hear. So any GPs out there, don't say that to anyone ever. So that just made me feel all the more desperate. And I just took it upon myself to try and find a way out because I was desperate. My work, I had to stop working. My marriage was breaking down because of it. Everything was gradually crumbling and falling apart. So yeah, I took it upon myself with a friend who was also struggling, actually. I need to mention him, my friend Matt, who we kind of went on this journey together. And looked into various things like daily journaling. That just ended up with loads of really depressing prose that I wrote. Walks in nature, because apparently scientifically just 5 minutes in nature makes you feel better. I was almost internally screaming at the trees at that point, just like, why don't I feel better? Why isn't this working? You know, once you get to a point where you're so desperate, these things that would otherwise be good tools, your desperation kind of squeezes the life out of their ability to actually help you. So it was via that journey I came across people talking about ayahuasca and how they'd use that to help their depression. At that point in time, I know better now. I just thought, you know, I can't leave the house most days. The chances of me going to South America to, you know, drink this brew are remote. And I didn't have any money because I'd had to stop working. So, but it was via that I came across a lecture from Robin Carhart Harris at Imperial College. And that he ended that lecture by saying that they were looking to run a pilot study on the effect of psilocybin on depression. So pretty much immediately got in touch with the team, went to see, I think it was the inaugural Psychedelic Society event where Professor Nutt spoke there, because I was trying to check if these people were okay. Can I trust them? Can I put my mental health, my life in their hands, you know? And just to mention, I was speaking to Irene earlier about this, I wasn't psychedelic naive, but that almost made it more of a barrier to me going ahead with this because I had my last experience was a very difficult, challenging experience with LSD in my early 20s. And that kind of, after that was like, I'm never touching psychedelics again. And here we are, you know? So it was almost, there was a lot more fear there, I think, for me than there would have been if I'd been psychedelic naive. But I would say, well, gradually developed, so applied, heard back, and was lucky to be one of 20 people that were part of this pilot study. I would say that so there were 2 doses, a 10 milligram dose and a 25 milligram dose 1 week later. And the 10 milligram dose, I didn't trust the people around me enough to fully let go. I was very resistant, very kind of pushing back against it, trying to control how I was feeling. But that was, I can't stress the importance of having the best team around you, was able to speak to the team after that and say, these were the problems, this is what came up. And they spoke to me and helped me through all of that. And then for the high dose, I had that trust that I needed to fully let go. And I'm not saying that that was easy. It still wasn't. It was very difficult. I faced my abusive father during that second dose. It was really dark and really difficult at times. But because of that conversation and because of having that second chance as well, I think this is why one dose trials for me, I think it's so much hanging on that one occasion. I think it puts so much pressure on, well, probably on everyone for it to work. This must work. And having that second chance, that's when I really, went into really dark places, but was able to trust that I could do that, because then I developed the trust in my guides around me, sitters, whatever you want to call them, the team around me. And was able to eventually, after, still quite a bit of resistance and a lot of dark, difficult moments, get to a point where I think it was facing those dark and difficult, they were visually represented to me. It was by doing that I got to the point where I was like, if I can face that, I can face anything. And so the rest of the experience wasn't unicorns and rainbows by any stretch. There was still a lot of difficulty. There were a lot of tears. There was laughter as well. But it's because it's like the opposite of depression, where you're pushing against all the time. You're like, I don't want to feel like this. I don't want to experience these emotions, thoughts, or feelings. And during that high dose, it was like, I'm open to anything that comes up within me. It was like the polar opposite of that resistance, really. It was like an acceptance of like, any emotion is part of the human experience. If I cry, that's fine, I'll embrace that. It's as valid as laughter, And it's really important to mention that, because that didn't just last during the dose itself. It lasted for I still have it in theory now within me, but it was actually sort of a different way of being for 2 to 3 months afterwards, So that my afterglow, or whatever you want to call it, involved a very different approach to being a human being. I think we all try and clip and filter the things we're allowed to think and feel, and that openness really served me and really kind of helped me to feel, just more grounded and more kind of secure in who I was. After those 3 months, things gradually, life conspires as it does to throw shit your way, and the old patterns gradually reestablish themselves. And it's important to say that as well. It's not about that magic, the silver bullet that cures you for life. It takes, I didn't know at the time, there wasn't as much back then onus on integration. I think it was a good 2 years after before Ros Watts and Michelle Baker-Jones set up their integration group. So there wasn't really, to my knowledge, really anywhere for me to go afterwards. That's back in 2015. And I think that would have been really helpful for me. And I'm really glad that there's a lot more focus on that now, because I think that's what people need. You need that ongoing integration. And while data collection for a trial may end after 6 months, 12 months, that ongoing work, it's like we have a community of former trial participants. They're all still doing the work, I think it's also important to mention, I was speaking to Irene about this earlier, that I understand why people that have been through these clinical trials, I'm going off on a tangent now, but are kind of forced into, either trying to find another clinical trial, and I was very lucky to have taken part in 2, albeit with a very different outcome and no afterglow. It still served me in many ways and still continues to. But you're forced into trying to access another clinical trial or breaking the law. And we can argue about the law needing to change, but it's when you struggle with, it's not just depression, but struggle with like an ongoing chronic health condition, you have enough to deal with anyway without having to worry about, well, if I break the law, what if this happens? What if I get caught? Or what if wherever I go, you know, I can't trust who I'm doing it with, I'm not in a safe place. And some people just point blank refuse to, they want the container they had during the clinical trial again, and it's inaccessible for most people. So there is, and this is something that Eddie Jacobs wrote a paper about having, you know, continued access afterwards. There is like, somebody else in this room will know about Helsinki, what's it called? Anyone? There is already a convention for people to be able to, like a legal right for people that have had successful treatment to access it post clinical trial. And I think that's something that we probably need to push for. Whether it's going to happen, because psychedelics are such a loaded topic, and yeah, who's going to do that? But I just see that people are desperate to continue the work and they can't, you know. Luckily, I took part in a second clinical trial, but I think the clinical trials are harder and harder to access. I think the more, there'll be people in this room that might disagree with this and know better. But it seems the further we go down the line, the more stringent the screening becomes. Now, the reasons for that could be just purely rooted in safety. Cynically, it could be because they're trying to gear the results. I don't know. I don't want to put that out there because I'll get shot by someone, probably. Yeah, the clinical trial experience is very administratively heavy. I think there have been moves to lighten that, but you kind of have to be functioning on some level to be able to deal with the amount of surveys and data that you are expected to provide. If you're struggling to get out of bed and function every day, I do think that's a definite bar for people to be able to even get onto a clinical trial. It's a lot. I'm not saying the people that are taking part in clinical trials aren't struggling, because everyone I know has been, but there is a kind of level of functioning you still need to be able to access them. So again, it's another bar. Plus, I mean, as a white male as well, I've got working class roots, but you could argue I'm middle class now. Again, it's like there is no real kind of the people that desperately need these treatments aren't really able to access them either. There are so many financial bars, and yeah, we really desperately need to look at that together and work together to ensure that the people that need these treatments the most can access them. And that's something that we really want to work on as well. But yeah, I've gone off on a huge tangent there. Yeah.
All good. All good.
Very
good.
Okay.
Do you want to continue with the reflections?
Yeah, so there are a few questions that have been posed. I have some reflections to give as well. I feel like I'm looking down a lot and reading a lot, so apologies for that. But
You're doing fine, mate.
I really am. Good. Thank you. Thank you. So these are all, and I think, Irene, you came up with these questions, did you?
Oh, what brought some kind of
Yeah.
issues challenging?
Yeah, they're challenging. None of them have a sort of an obvious or direct answer, but it's something, they're definitely topics we all need to think about and work our way through. So first of all, informed consent. So I'll read the slides and then I'll give reflections. So the vampire problem of informed consent for psychedelic experience, which has been highlighted by Eddie Jacobs in a paper. If one cannot know the outcomes of their experience before they have it, including its potential transformative effects, they cannot give informed consent. So yeah, reflecting my experiences, yeah. I don't need to read that bit really, do I? Because that's kind of aimed at me. So what do I think? What do I think about that? And yeah, I would agree with the Eddie Jacobs' point, really, it's impossible to gain fully informed consent because I mean, he mentions vampires, but also the vampire problem, but also mentions parenthood. Like you don't know what it's like until you're there. So how can you be sort of fully informed? You can do your research, you can, you know, look at, oh, what's it like being a parent? You can ask people, whatever, but you don't know what it's like until you're actually in that position. So I think it's really key. You could say if you can't gain informed consent, then let's just all stop. You know, there's no way that we can do this. And still think that with the potential that these treatments are showing, we do need to find a way. So I think it's really important to give people a balance of information. So Eddie Jacobs mentions, you know, informing people as much as possible as to what potential outcomes may be. So, you know, they may deeply change a person in some ways, may change their view of themselves, others, the world, that it could be profound or a very important experience. You know, we've probably all heard that, oh yeah, it's up there with my wedding day, the birth of my first child and all of that. But I think it's really important as well to tell participants beforehand that it may not have any tangible effect as well, because otherwise we're feeding into that. This is going to be one of the biggest experiences of your life. And if that doesn't happen, then that crushing disappointment afterwards, if it doesn't work, or you don't have that breakthrough, or you don't reframe your depression or whatever, then in some ways that's a failure. So I think having a balance between those two, it definitely needs to be, there needs to be a discussion around that. Expectations need to be managed. Also, you don't want to frighten people too much. You also don't want to guide them too much, like this is what your experience will be. You don't want to overpromise a fix either. You don't want to mirror that media hype that's out there. But yeah, having some manageable amount of information that you give people as to the potential outcomes, I think can only be a good thing, because then at least you can consent to those potential outcomes, perhaps. Or if it sounds like something you really couldn't face or deal with, having things shifted that much, then you could decide not to go through with it. But it's really hard, and it's a brilliant question, and one that we all need to try and learn to navigate. I think for me, like from personal experience, my depression was reframed during that first trial. I went from seeing it as this dark part of myself that I wanted to cut out of myself and get rid of. And then after that, just my approach became more of dealing with it like an ongoing relationship. So it needs work, like any relationship. You have peaks and troughs, you have good days, bad days, you have a falling out every now and then or whatever, you know. And that's really helped me. But there was no, I don't know, you can't, I wouldn't have, if somebody had said that to me before, I would have had no real idea how that felt. It's only until I got to that point myself that I really understood. So I also agree with Eddie Jacobs' point. So you have like the clinical teams are trying to give within reason as much information about potential outcomes as possible. But he also mentions that maybe there's a place for those due to receive treatment to meet former participants, which could be seen as the first element of peer support, really. I think that could work well. It could help people to discuss, you know, what may happen. But once again, have to be very careful not to guide that person and colour that person's experience too much beforehand. And also need to keep that onus on the fact that people's experiences are wildly different. So yeah, I think having access to balanced information beforehand without overwhelming people is the way forward. Okay, so psychedelic vulnerability. So there's been lots of talk about psychedelic-induced neuroplasticity. There's also been a lot of evidence on psychedelic-induced suggestibility meaning people are more malleable while under the influence of psychedelics and potentially for a while after. So the question is, considering all emerging reports of abuse from authorities, whether doctors or never know if it's shamans or shamans, it's probably split the room on that one, I don't know, but do you have any ideas on what can be done to better protect people in these states and after their experiences? So that flexibility, that suggestibility, the malleability, you know, is the very reason that many people believe these treatments have the potential to disrupt the ingrained thought or behavioural patterns that play a huge part in conditions such as depression, anorexia nervosa, or PTSD. I'd say, you know, it's vital that there are adequate safeguarding measures placed around people in that vulnerable state so that malleability of the mind or suggestibility isn't able to be exploited and people abused, whether that's in a clinical or a shamanic setting. Now, how do you do that? It's very difficult when we know of cases of abuse within rooms where, you know, there's a camera present. So you would imagine that should be enough of a deterrent or a safeguarding measure to prevent it happening. So how we do that is very, difficult to navigate. I would say, you know, what we need, regardless of the setting, is that we need, and I'm sure these are in place already, but we need ethical codes of conduct in place in all settings. Registered practitioners, clear mechanisms to report any abuse or breaches of boundaries or trust in any setting. And I realise when you're talking about the shamanic setting, you're like, well, how are you going to do that? And yeah, obviously that would involve changing the law. So it would, you know, anyone that's saying, look, could therefore report somebody without getting into trouble for actually taking part in an illegal ceremony in the first place. That's a different topic altogether in some respects. But I think the fact that the psychedelic experience may dissolve traditional participant practitioner boundaries is all the more reason to have these codes and safeguarding measures in place, not indulge in the psychedelic exceptionalism of different rules apply. You know, it's really difficult because in some ways the dissolving of those traditional boundaries is required to an extent for that trust to develop between the participant and the other people in the room. So it's really hard to manage that. Psychedelics do compromise that distance that there normally is within that therapeutic environment. I don't know if I'm really answering this question very well. There's so much to unpack and so much to work through. I hope we can come up with some kind of, you know, effective ethical framework that applies to both clinical settings and shamanic settings that can be implemented effectively. Because, yeah, that suggestible state will be exploited by some people that, you know, have the worst intentions, you know. Okay. So, the importance of community and integration, thinking on the role of community when coming out from these experiences. Do you think there's personal and interpersonal work one needs to do for their integration before joining a community where psychedelic experiences are discussed? So 100%, I'd say yes to that. It's essential that people have adequate therapeutic support before, during, and after the treatment from the clinical team. Supported integration work needs to be done to help people understand, process, and navigate their experiences before they enter any peer support service. So we're looking to set up peer support groups, which may, you know, obviously help towards integration, but it has to be, those spaces have to be maintained as a completely non-therapeutic space, as nobody within that space is a qualified mental health professional. And I'd say this again points towards the importance of therapy within the clinical treatment model. That supportive container is vital to how people emerge, how able they are to cope afterwards, how long they're able to stay in remission. People need to be empowered. A lot of people say that the psychedelic experience has kind of woken their own sort of inner sort of healer, if you like. But most people require professional support to get to that point, at least initially. If corners are cut and therapy is reduced, or as some wish and keep talking about at the moment, if therapy is done away with entirely from these trials, then, or treatments, there'll be many people who haven't been able to integrate their experiences, who are cut adrift to navigate what may appear to be a very different world post-treatment alone. They will also potentially not be suitable to enter a peer support space, as they still require the professional therapeutic support. I think the effect of this could, yeah, it's potentially dangerous, and it could derail psychedelic assisted therapy as a, you know, a clinical treatment as a whole. All you need is a few stories in the Daily Mail about how, you know, people have lives fallen apart after they've been spat out the end of a trial with no therapy, and yeah, we're back to square one. Okay. I am heartened. That sounded quite negative towards the end now. I'm quite heartened that, not doom and gloom, I'm quite heartened that even in the space of 12 to 18 months, over the past couple of years, more people, say like at the Psych Symposium 2 years ago, people were just talking about psychedelic therapy. Last year, they were talking about psychedelic-assisted therapy. There was a lot more talk about participants, about participant welfare. Seeing these, yeah, treatments as catalysts rather than cures within their own right, I think that seems to be dominating more now, and there is a pushback, and we can all argue why that is. But yeah, it would save a lot of money to get rid of the therapeutic element, but ultimately I think that will be potentially the end of, yeah, the end of things. So I'm really heartened that things are going in that way. I'm really heartened that, we'll talk about this next actually, there are more measures in place to actually look after people. Yeah, right, I will get on to the next question. So, okay, I was on, was I on the wrong slide there? I don't know what I've done here.
You're right.
Okay, yeah, so, gaps, yeah, what are the gaps that we're sensing in the understanding of psychedelic practitioners, and what areas would you want to see more psychedelic research on in future? So, yeah, I think overall, at the moment, the level and scope of understanding and among practitioners in the UK at least seems to be very high, although of course there's always room for improvement. But I think that's down to the fact probably that we're still dealing with a relatively small pool of knowledgeable, ultra committed, passionate people. Yeah, there's some massive egos out there as well. Let's just mention that too. But I think the majority of people that I've met and I've, well, personally been taken care of by as well, seem very, very committed to this, and their level of scope of understanding is very high. But I think this will change as the phase 3 trials begin. I think that will see more people coming into this area without psychedelic experience. We see it on different levels, but say people from maybe a more traditional, depends on which aspect of the sector we're talking about, but from a pharmaceutical background or traditional medical background, I think the gaps will become more apparent then. Certain people we speak to, it's very apparent already, and you kind of have to pitch what you're saying to a different level for them, you know. And that's, you know, people don't know what they don't know. But yeah, it's becoming clear that as more people come into this sector, there are those gaps in knowledge. So I think this is where training is desperately needed around why psychedelics require a different approach, why preparation and integration are so important. And I imagine everyone in this room would know that already, but out there with people that are coming into this sector, people sometimes voice surprise. Oh, I didn't realise that preparation was such an important part of it. Part of you is concerned by that, but then if, you know, as an organisation, PsyPAN helping, we can help in some way to kind of increase that understanding, hopefully. So those gaps can be filled. I think also really explaining to people, helping people understand that drug is a catalyst, as I said before, for therapy rather than a cure in and of itself. As far as the areas we want to see more research in, I do think that, and I don't know how you do this, and there'll be people in this room that might know how to do this. How do you prove that the therapeutic element is vital to these treatments without running a trial where you give people no therapy? I don't know how you do that, because I think that that is probably a huge safeguarding issue if you have like two streams, some get therapy, some don't. But I think if we really need to kind of nail that down rather than it just being, oh, well, you know, it's a nice idea, but maybe it's, you know, maybe it's dispensable. Maybe we can just get rid of the therapeutic element. So yeah, to try and remove that, I don't think it's a grey area for most people, but I think if you're looking to make as much money as possible out of these treatments, then that's when you start pushing against it, probably. Yes. Anyway, so we'd also like to see more research into the benefits of what comes after, really, of being part of a post-trial community on people's long-term recovery. This is something that I think both Leonie and we are facilitators for Ros Watt's ACER integration program. I think they are, I don't know if they're doing it scientifically, but they are looking at the effect on people and their well-being, being part of that community. We're also, once we start providing peer support groups, we're going to be looking at that as well. So we're looking to get people involved in monitoring sort of, and that will be purely for ex-clinical trial participants, you know, where people are at the beginning of that and how, you know, being part of that peer support community, maintains their stability or their well-being. I think there are certain things that, I mentioned earlier, certain things that we want to see happen. Some maybe a bit, maybe too much to ask, but that ongoing access post-trial would be amazing. And I know that would cost a lot of money, but at the moment, so many people are they're coming out the end of the clinical trial process and they see it's the beginning of the journey, you know, and then there's nowhere else for them to go. And you can always say, oh, well, the underground exists, but navigating that, particularly now that hype has got to such a level and there are people involved within that area that may just be looking to exploit people or make money out of people, or at worst, you know, abuse people or whatever. You know, it's I don't want to speak badly of the underground itself, but I think you have to have a lot of knowledge to navigate it safely, and a lot of people just can't take that or can't face taking that leap. Don't want to break the law, etc. I'd also say that, and again, this costs money, but I've been really heartened to see that more trials are doing this, to have open label extensions as standard. So, and I know that probably people in the room going, God, do you know how much that costs? But it's happening a lot more now, because I do think that it's a safeguarding issue in itself, really. If somebody can be taken off of their regular medication, as ineffective as that may be, then they go through a clinical trial, they get put on the placebo arm with all the hype around as well. It just adds to that, the desperation of not receiving what you hoped for. I mean, it's bad enough receiving an active dose and it not working in the way that you'd hoped, but to be on the placebo arm of a trial, when you've, and again, this needs to be managed at the start of the trial as well with the information that participants are given, but yeah, sorry, lost my thread. Yeah, yeah, that was it. I've got it. So people seeing it as their last hope, and I know a lot of people on the trials that I've taken part in, and other people that are part of the PsyPAN community. A lot of people see it as their last hope because they've been through that same process of years and years and years of failed treatments, you know. So yeah, I think to have open label extensions where somebody is guaranteed to get an active dose, even if they're on a placebo arm X weeks later, yeah, I think that's a necessity, really, to be honest. Yeah, so I've gone on quite a bit there. So there's probably about 2 minutes for a Q&A. I don't know, but yeah, thanks all.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Yeah, so any questions?
So, and from online as well, people are very welcome to put their questions in the chat. Just going to open this here. And yeah, any first questions in the room, Celine?
Well, thanks so much for sharing all your experiences under the. That's really amazing. And feel free not to answer this question.
Okay.
I was just wondering, so the first trial you responded, right?
Yeah.
And had 3 months of a window.
Mhm.
Why do you think with the Compass one, why didn't that have the same effects? What's your opinion?
Difficult to say.
Yeah.
I fed back to the team afterwards what I felt could have been different or better. I wasn't complaining. It wasn't like, you know, yeah, it wasn't like sort of customer service complaint or whatever, but it was just like these things could have been better. I do think that around the trial model itself, it was that one chance that time. I found out it took about, because the trial was quite large, I think it was only about 3 years after I took part in the trial that I finally found out what my dose was, that they could actually tell me. And I did get the high dose, luckily, but I think it was the fact that it was a single dose trial that didn't help. I'd got into such a desperate place over those 4 years after the Imperial trial that I was desperate for that lifting again, the afterglow, the weight off my shoulders, the clouds apart, you know. And I think my expectation around that was really high. I think it being one dose, there's so much hanging on that didn't help. I do think as well, and I've said this publicly before, that there are certain things that are really, really key for your integration and your ongoing work that you do afterwards. And I know it's the same for a lot of people, but the playlist was really, really important to me during both trials. After the Imperial trial, I listened to it daily, you know, parts of it at least. After the Compass trial, they said, no, we can't give you access to the playlist. And it was like, for me, such a key tool that I wasn't allowed to access. And it wasn't like it was bespoke music, it was a playlist of other people's music. But I think that's when you start, maybe, I don't know the reasoning behind it, but if you start looking at sort of the more corporate side of things, and it's like, oh, well, that order of those tracks is our intellectual property, or whatever it is, I don't know, then if it's to the detriment of participants and their outcomes, I think that's when you have to question that sort of thing. Yeah, there was a lot. I didn't feel I set a very specific or good intention beforehand, and I don't want to blame myself for it not working, but I was asked repeatedly, and I was like, I just want to stop feeling so shit. You know, I needed something maybe a bit more tangible, and they really tried to work with me. The team were amazing, you know, really, really good. But yeah, I need to, with the team as well, I have to say that afterwards, like I was crestfallen afterwards because the depression had just come straight back. But it was the sessions afterwards with the team that they really, really helped me, you know, and they were like, and this isn't how I took it, and I wouldn't, you've got to be mindful of not bypassing things and not sort of trying to sort of sugarcoat things or whatever. But this isn't how it felt at the time, wasn't the effect it had on me. It had a really profound effect on me when a member of the team said to me, you know, maybe you didn't get what you wanted, but maybe you got what you needed. And I still had that. I still had deep insights. I still had during the dose itself, my depression lifted during that. But it was kind of that trial did set me off on a different therapeutic path that was more somatic, more. It was horrible. I didn't want to do the hard work. I really didn't want to do it. I didn't have to do the hard work the time before, but then it kind of, I'm really glad I had an afterglow after the first trial, but it kind of let me off the hook a bit as far as doing the difficult work went. So yeah, after the second trial, that's what I've been doing ever since, and it's not an easy path to walk, but it's been really valuable to me and has largely kept me on track, you know. So, and I realise that comment, it can sound like, oh, you're just sort of, you know, you're washing over the fact it didn't work. But that statement actually really, really helped me. It was like, well, the hard work begins now. And I was like, shit, all right then. If I have to, you know.
No, that's we'll ask one tiny mini question more, and then
Yeah.
that's really good. No, this is just because you were saying about your peer support groups. You're starting with PsyPAN.
Yeah.
Because I'm running a phase 3 trial.
Yeah.
And we built that into the models to do that afterwards. But like, what are you doing with the placebo people? Are they in a group on their own, or are they mixed in with other people?
The problem we have at the moment is that placebo people or people who
placebo people sounds
well, you know what I mean.
yeah.
No, but yeah, people that receive placebo or
that's my
or people that haven't, you know, it just hasn't worked for them, even if they have had, you know, an active dose. They generally don't tend to seek us out. They generally don't try to find us because it's been a negative experience to them. And I think that that is something that we really need to work with organisations providing these trials, because I think in many respects that support is, well, I don't want to say it's more or less important, but it's so important that I was responsible for just adding people after the phase 2 of the Imperial psilocybin for depression trial, adding people that had taken part in the trial to the WhatsApp group, and it was very clear, you know, we had people that hadn't received an active dose that had been on the placebo. I think for that was the antidepressant arm of the trial, yeah. And they really didn't stick around for very long in that group. You had people in there going, oh, you know, this has been really profound or really difficult even, but it's like they've got what, you know, something that people that have got the antidepressants hadn't received. And there was a clear divide there. So I really think that there's a huge space for having placebo arm peer support groups. Yeah.
We'll talk to
So
you
I'm
about
really, really
helping out.
glad that you're doing that.
It's
Yeah,
really
it's great.
Can't talk to you often.
Yeah, okay.
We have James raising his hand for a question online.
Okay, so,
There he is.
yeah.
Hello, can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, James.
Hey, so just want to say thanks, firstly. This has been one of my favourite Colloquiums so far. I just feel like it's been really nice to hear a down-to-earth and realistic take of, one, what it's like to live with depression, and two, what it's like to go through being, treated for depression. And so I'm basically just thinking about how, with your work, you can best argue to kind of retain psychological therapy as part of treating depression with psychedelics. I recently finished a bit of work on something called a definitive randomized control trial that was looking at mindfulness for people with depression that hadn't responded to cognitive behavioral therapy in NHS talking therapies. And it used what's called a mixed methods design. And that's when the researchers don't just look at quantitative outcomes, so how much people's depression scores went down, but they also recruited a subset of participants to do qualitative interviews where they asked them in depth what it was like to do mindfulness, to be part of a group, and how, if at all, it helped with their depression. And I helped with this quality piece, and it was just so fascinating reading the interviews. And the results are like embargoed at the moment, so I can't share anything sadly about them, but it will hopefully eventually inform how mindfulness could be implemented in services. So it's a really kind of important sort of way of including patients' voices in the process of evaluating and then implementing a therapy. And I guess my question for you is, and I guess others in the room is, are psychedelic trials using mixed methods and doing qualitative interviews with participants? Is this work being published and talked about at conferences? If not, can you put pressure on funders and researchers to make it a part of trial designs? Or alternatively, could you just run like a low budget project with like a keen sort of master's or PhD student at Exeter and put together an interview, sort of a set of interview questions, and maybe try and recruit participants via your own network, and then ask them explicitly about the importance of therapy, and then maybe write a piece about it?
I'm not best placed to answer aspects of that, but my feeling is, and I'd be really interested to know what other people in the room, what their experience of this is, that the qualitative side of research is always seen as secondary. I'm aware of sort of major trials where that was meant to be part of, the research coming out at the end, and it hasn't happened. So that might answer that part of your question. In part, I don't know. There are other people in this room, not looking at anyone in particular, who might know the truth around that. But
no, they're definitely part, right? Or Leon, I don't know. But yeah, it's definitely seen as secondary, you're right, as you said, I think. But I mean, because of the outcomes being based on the quantitative stuff, but it is the most interesting part. It's the interesting bit, right?
Myself supervising projects in philosophy and social science that actually do just that. So do the qualitative work alongside what maybe seems to be the major focus in the clinical trial design, but that's the nature of the scientification of this kind of research, that the focus is not on the qualitative research, but that's the problem of it as well. So yes, of course, we should shift that around. The qualitative is the thing that really helps you evaluate whether what you've been doing there gets anything really at all. Because the data you collect always brush over what is really the interesting part. And Celia has published on this with colleagues from a previous trial where there was a small qualitative element that has, these things are published and people talk about them at conferences. And this is where there's a lot of interest and curiosity. It's just difficult to actually do this in large numbers because, of course, doing qualitative research costs an enormous amount of time. So it is quite expensive to do. So you are in the same sort of trap you were talking about before. But on the other hand, there is certainly appreciation in the field that that more of this is needed. No doubt.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of it exists, and the therapists always push for that. The people who are in the contact with the patients. And Ro's connectedness paper is like very influential, qualitative analysis paper that's very influential on the field. But in general, there's, I think, even if there's a lot of it, the problem is that it doesn't, it's a knowledge that's communicated within the field. but it doesn't really have the power to influence, the business or the regulators, because they see it as inferior. So it seems that even if it would be everybody would do a lot of qualitative research is still considered inferior for the people in the decision-making places or the people who want to cut down the therapy. They don't care about qualitative research.
It's
Because it contradicts what they want.
Well,
It's not seen as inferior, it's potentially troubling.
Troubling.
That's the problem with
Yeah,
it.
they don't want to
It's
hear
not
it.
a question of superior, inferior. It's what you want to hear and what you don't
Yeah,
want to hear.
also that's.
So this is more like that.
You know where you are with a number.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's just
Yeah.
easier,
The
right?
regulators very much want the quantitative stuff, don't they? So if you're trying to get these things licensed,
They only
when
want
you
quantitative.
do a study, you have to jump through that, even if you like the idea of the quantitative stuff, if you want to jump through that hurdle to get the drug license, then you have to do that work.
Yeah.
And that also comes in talking about the sort of therapy aspect. My understanding, it's like with FDA, the regulators, is they struggle with it being a therapy and the drug. What is the thing that's doing the thing? So that's why Compass talk about now the psychological support model. And it is a form of therapy in a way, but they call it the psychological support model.
Yeah.
Right. And they might say, yes, once it gets licensed, then you can start looking at different therapies with it. But
Yeah.
it's jumping, get through this.
We all know the
get it
dangers of that
licensed.
though, don't we? Because it's that's why we're desperately trying to make sure that things are done properly now, because what then happens afterwards, if it strikes me, and I would love to be contradicted on this, that if psychedelic therapy, let's take the assisted part out of it, okay, if that helped people 20%, then that will be deemed to be enough. Whereas if it was with a therapeutic component, if you're up to like 40%, these numbers are just made up, but the urge will still be to go with the cheaper version, even though the benefits could be that much greater. And it's all to do with money. We do have to be mindful of that, and I don't want to live in sort of as much as we might want to destroy capitalism, is what we've got, but yeah, it's my worry is that corner cutting will diminish the effectiveness of these treatments, and also that fewer people will be able to be helped by them. And also potentially, like I was talking about earlier, that's actually a potentially dangerous path to go down, where there is no safe container for people, so they're just spat out at the end of it. And yeah, there's only so much of that happening before, we're back to the 60s, maybe the end of the 60s.
No, I totally agree with you. I just think people's hands are tied by the regulator. The regulator are confused about the therapy.
They won't regulate it.
Sorry?
They won't regulate therapy.
No.
That's not interesting.
No, and I think we were talking about this earlier, like there's this urge, and you hear it and you understand why it is. Like, if we are going to sort of argue the case for the therapeutic element, then that needs to be standardized, that needs to be and I think even with that's problematic, isn't it? Because if you advocate like one type of talking therapy that goes with psychedelic assisted therapy, again, a lot of people are going to be falling by the wayside. It won't be right for them. That's the thing, we have these, we have these treatments that kind of open people up, open things up, and kind of, but we're really trying desperately, and I get it's the system that we operate within, to try and narrow them and box them as much as possible so that we can actually make it happen. But by doing that, it's really difficult.
I was just going to say, it's great what you're doing. I think it's,
Thank you.
Because we've done some studies here, and I really think that's lacking. That's what you're hearing. People at the end of the study feel just left. So that ongoing support is.
A lot of people go from, the isolation and desperation of their health condition, living with that. And even if the treatment has been successful, inverted commas, however long that lasts, they go to feeling isolated afterwards, because perhaps they don't have that network of people in their lives that actually understand what they've been through, people roll their eyes, people see it as akin to talking about your dreams, you know, that sort of stuff, when really people are talking about deeply profound experiences. So just having those spaces, we get people that come up to us at the end of events sometimes, or people email us and they're just like so glad to be able to talk to somebody that understands what I've been through, even though experiences are so wildly different. Just having that space to be able to, yeah, speak openly, not be judged. It's really, really important. Yeah.
I just wanted to say, I think it's great what you're doing. I was just wondering, how far along are things in regards to bipolar? Is this being investigated? Is there being many studies on that at the moment? I was just, because I think there's definitely a potential benefit to that, I think, because it's quite anxiety related, and it can help you sort of get on top of that and find peace in yourself, and maybe see where it's coming from and see things in a different way.
My knowledge of the exact trials that are currently taking place, I do have some knowledge. Obviously, we're working with various organisations running them, but there might be somebody else in this room that is better placed to answer whether bipolar trials are up and running at the moment. I'm not aware. Is anyone
There's definitely some with ketamine, but
in the UK?
yeah, ketamine one, but not. I don't know about.
Well, bipolar 2 depression is okay, is treated, but bipolar 1 is normally an exclusion criteria. Wrongly, I would say.
That's what I was wondering about it, because I've got bipolar 1, so I'm literally like on the opposite end of the spectrum. I mean, my mood's always really high. It doesn't go low, it goes from high to maybe a bit over normal to high. So that's how my mood is all the time, constantly.
Right.
So I mean, I was on lithium therapy for 20 years, but I managed to come off it because I looked in the BNF and I thought it's going to destroy my liver and my kidneys before long. So I came off of it using magnesium, because I heard of a study where 50% of people managed to come off lithium using magnesium. I come off of it, and then I managed to fix some of the damage to my thyroid and get myself fit. And that's from the lithium therapy. I couldn't have carried on with it. I mean, it was already starting to damage me. But yeah, I just think there's something to that. I think it's just maybe a bit of a difficult one to.
John Anderson, if you look at John Anderson's good source.
I actually wrote an email that I haven't sent to him yet. I've literally written one. So yeah. I'm quite interested in it. Yeah.
Well, somebody doing a PhD on psychedelics and bipolar disorder.
Oh yeah, if you could get in contact with them.
I can't think what his name is.
Benjamin Martz, is it?
Nudge or something.
Yeah, Benjamin Martz.
Yeah, he had bipolar and he treated himself.
Yeah, he's finishing his PhD now.
I think it's they do. I do these screen. I think I have heard them screening people out, but I didn't know if there was anyone actually doing any proper research into it. I mean, they might think it might hamper the whole movement. Possibly it was. I don't know. There's probably obviously reasoning behind it. But whatever that is.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing so openly, and I'm glad that you've been able to. You've been able to take measures that have helped you. But yeah, I'm really glad also that we have lots of knowledge in the room, because I'm sorry I wasn't able to answer that directly, but hopefully that's given you some some things to follow up on, hopefully. It's really the more you hear about the different conditions that could potentially be that psychedelic assisted therapy could potentially treat. I don't know. I think sort of certain things that have definitely been part of the exclusion criteria in the past, having history of schizophrenia. I hear people going, oh, we need to look at that. We need to, look into, we need to research that. I don't know. I think bipolar is very different, but I don't know if that day will ever come, because I'm not sure. I'm not best placed to probably talk on that front. Sorry.
It's an interesting area, though. I think it's definitely something there. But I mean, it's just how it might be a bit more complicated to actually apply it and to figure out who's going to benefit and who's not. And it's just the risk benefit really as well, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's the overlap between sort of different conditions as well, because as we know, the sort of very few people are very, fit within those defined boundaries of a condition. People may get screened out for borderline personality disorder or something because there's an overlap in some of the symptoms with, I think on the second depression, psilocybin for depression study I took part in, I scored highly, well, just enough to still take part, but with BPD. So yeah, it's really, it's difficult because very few people fit these criteria rigidly. And yeah, it can therefore be much harder to actually access a clinical trial for the condition that you live with. But,
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. Appreciate your openness as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you at the back were first. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you for sharing that, especially the personal experience was really fascinating, and a lot of us may be able to relate with difficulty treating depression and stuff. So my question would be, if someone enlisted in one of the clinical trials, let's say they were in the active arm and they suffered harm, either be it kind of like, worsening of their depression or whatever mental health might be the problem they had, or spiritual crisis or whatever, what is the duty of care of the sort of like clinical trial kind of like organization to those people? Do they just kind of like release them out in the wild to the NHS? Or do they have a duty of actually treating them there and then for that? And what do you see happening really kind of like at the ideal end?
To be honest with you, I see my experience has been so far, from what I've heard from other people that are part of the PsyPAN, community of former trial participants, that the teams around them have done their utmost to support them in every way they possibly can. So they have taken it seriously, they have taken that duty of care seriously, but they've still been limited in what they can do. And that can be because people are being maybe put back to the NHS, or because they lack the resources within the team to be able to address that properly. I think it's not born out of a lack of wanting to support and help somebody, but I do think there are limitations that that teams face in supporting people that have had those experiences. It's really difficult, because as soon as you do get back to, as you say, putting people back to the NHS, then that is inherently a struggling system in, probably in every area in this country at the moment. It's I don't think there's a I think that duty of care is I haven't come across anything where somebody has just neglected that and gone, not my problem. People are trying to do their best, and people are trying to provide everything they can. People are going above and beyond. They're giving up their spare time to help with those kinds of cases. But once you get to the end of what you're able to do within that team, and you're putting people back to the NHS, that's an inherent issue in itself, which is why we need maybe a more diverse range of tools to help people as well. I haven't come across anyone that's just been rejected out of hand. I have, how sometimes that's presented in the data afterwards is maybe a bit grayer, but I think the people that are part of these teams are trying to do their very best is the general sense I get. Was somebody, there was somebody at the back, so I think it was you you put your hand up before, didn't you, earlier?
Maybe not before.
Did you? Okay. In that case, I think that in that case, there was somebody else around there. I think you were next, maybe.
I don't know.
So you, and you. Right. Is that okay?
No, I was thinking, you said something in the beginning, you said something along the lines of like, back in the 60s, maybe sort of everyone would, like it made me think of, I think it's Terence McKenna quoting Timothy Leary saying something about like, at that time, LSD is a drug known to lead to madness in people who've not taken it, right? So it had that branding problem back then. And then now you're saying it's kind of the opposite situation happening where sort of like, just drop some LSD or put it in the water supply and then everyone, no trauma in whatever it was.
Yeah, Trump needs to take psychedelics, all of that kind of way of thinking.
Yeah, that whole
That's what
magic
happened.
pill,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. So
Yeah.
it seems to me that psychedelics has a big branding problem in general, and that seems to be maybe an overcorrection of the hysteria and madness in people who had not taken it before. So now we're sort of coming on the scene again and sort of, we can talk about these things, we can research about it, we can do all these things. So now we're not gonna have this shut down. So like, listen, everyone, it's gonna work. You get cured and all that kind of stuff. So I was wondering in your situation, now you're saying you're not a psychedelic virgin. So before you tried it, before you did the clinical trials.
Yeah.
So you must have had some friends on some debaucherous friends and so on who you could talk with. But I mean, when so like here you can talk to people who've had experiences and so on, and I'm sure you've talked to other people who've had experiences and have had some kind of community. But what about all the people in your life who might not have had any understanding of this and so on? Like, have you had those conversations with those people? How would they receive it? What do you think is the problem? Or should we change the word? Should we find another word than psychedelics or something? I mean, how do we get to a place where we're not looking at it as either as crazy cure or something that drives you crazy? And maybe take, like, if you have some experiences from conversations you've had with people who might not have had any kind of idea about what you
How do we get away from that? The hope is that the science wins through, and that we, so rather than, I think there are a lot of deeply passionate people in this area that believe in the potential of psychedelics and really want them to work, but are still rooted in the science of it all and are staying grounded and if it doesn't, if it's not shown to be effective, then obviously, that's the message that gets put out there. But there are maybe other people that, this is kind of the excitement is too great. And so I know, for instance, like certain people within the field who've changed their view of, that understandable excitement of the potential of these as therapeutic treatments has been tempered. I don't know, you might have seen Ros Watts' TEDx talk and then read the blog that she wrote a few years after. She's gone from that kind of, not evangelical, but kind of like, this is amazing, this has got the potential to change the world, to being more kind of tempered and being like, well, this may have its place, but we need to ensure that proper safeguarding is in place, etc. It's not the elixir for all of the world's suffering. I do think we have an amazing scientific community in this country. I do think they're doing amazing work. I think that there are those people that say outlandish things and may hype things too much. But once it comes to, I mean, that's on a more kind of conversational level if they're speaking at an event or something. But I think the way that the structures that we have in this country for the science, the people in this room would know, there's no way that you can't make an unsubstantiated, outlandish claim in a scientific paper, can you?
Yes.
Can you?
You're a successful scientist.
Okay, so that's possible too. That would be my hope, would be that would win out, that would win through. They would be like, it has to be proven, and that kind of brings things down to a nuanced and realistic level.
But see, this, okay, can I?
Yeah.
Sure, cool. But see, this is where, that's what I have a little bit of a problem with as well. Because I kind of also do like a bit of the madness of it.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think there should be room for that as well.
Yeah.
But I don't know, I mean, I'm not saying, well, I mean, I completely agree with what you're saying, but I also do think that alongside of that, it's okay that there's an ecstatic element to it. It's okay that there is a hallelujah element to it as well,
Yeah.
Because that's also kind of like, in terms of my own experiences, that hallelujah moment is extremely important. And also having that hallelujah moment broken down as well is also extremely important, right? So you need to sort of, I mean, there needs to be room for the whole thing, I feel.
Yeah, it's not about denying that aspect, or whatever you want to call that hallelujah aspect. It's not about denying that. It's just about being honest about, like, it's the difference between covering that and going, yeah, you may end up in a joyful state or whatever. That is true for many people. But I think the problem we have is when we get into the realms of saying that everyone is going to respond in this way, we need to have that honest conversation around that. Not everyone is going to feel that. Not everyone's depression is going to be lifted by a psychedelic experience. And I think it is fighting against that hype. So yeah, there's a place for speaking about those positives, speaking about the spiritual element, or whatever you want to call it, that people may have these epiphanies or this sort of feeling of deep connection, joy, whatever. But I think it is really about being honest. It's like the conversation earlier about how about informed consent. It's like, well, that may happen, but if people are led to believe that everyone's going to have that hallelujah moment because of psychedelics, that's dangerous in itself. That is to the detriment of people that are taking it recreationally or taking part in a clinical trial. The expectation level, it could lead to somebody, particularly if they're taking part in a trial of depression, they're expecting that, then it could be even worse for them not to receive that. So I think it's not about sort of taking the shine out of it, or to, deny that there are positive responses at all, but it's about being honest about the range of responses.
Sure. I mean, and there's also very many different settings that psychedelics work in, right? There's a therapeutical setting. There's a ritualistic setting, maybe somewhere.
Yeah.
There's a party setting. People who say that psychedelics aren't party drugs never ain't fucking done psychedelics at a party then, because it's a lot of fun. But anyway, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
First of all, I think I just wanted to kind of say thank you for kind of like, for myself, I don't know for the rest of the room, but reminding me that there is a person at the end of the day. Like, I know it sounds a bit cool, but like, I think we get so engrossed with the numbers sometimes. Oh yeah, this is the percentage that people 1 year after treatment-resistant depression, this is their response. And it's quite nice to actually remember, actually, there's a person behind this, the people that don't benefit, what are their lives like? So that's kind of like the first thing I want to say thank you for. And I kind of briefing off back to kind of like the whole thing about how packaging up psychedelics with kind of therapies, and I can't, I just want to kind of bring people's attention, like, in terms of how the NHS in the UK works in terms of quality years, like quality adjusted life adjustment years, and how much they spend. They spend between 20 and 30,000 pounds per year is what they deem as a quality year improvement in life. And I think that's why, as clinicians and as everyone else in the room, like, we're so desperate trying to get us through paperwork to, oh yeah, no, it's a great thing and whatnot. And it is a danger, and it's like, I think, acknowledged danger, but it's one of those things, like, we can probably take another 30 years to fix all those bumps out, to do it properly. But then, or do we rather rush it out in a little bit, maybe prematurely? Yes, there'll be probably negatives and people lost, but then do we overall, as a society, benefit overall more? Is that something to be, willing to accept? Because with any treatment there's going to be negatives, and it's just trying to adjust time and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that's kind of a bit of a tangent. Now, my question is, you mentioned, how you were in this process, and like, in terms of people signing up and doing the forms and surveys. You at one point you mentioned that you didn't want to do the work, but you realized you had to do the work. Do you feel like you were prepared in the beginning of this process that actually, like, there is a large amount of
participation from yourself in this process of you getting better, and where you kind of like guided towards that, like, okay, look, you know, this is a drug and I'm gonna help you out, but there is still a lot on you to do it. Kind of, were you prepared for that, or how was that kind of navigated in the trials?
Yeah, so I think I was talking about this earlier. I think I was very much, and it's very easy to get into this state of mind where you're looking for a treatment, a drug, a therapy, a book, an activity that is suddenly going to make you better. So you're sort of externally looking for something that's gonna fix you, really. And I do think, and this is true for me and true for quite a few other people that I've spoken to that, you know, receive psychedelic assisted therapy, that it does awaken something within you. And that can come via sometimes, like I experienced self-compassion for the first time during the high dose of the first trial. Never felt that before. It was a nice idea. How do you do it? You know, and I think from that and linked to that is that sense. It's a participant in the anorexia nervosa trial at Imperial College, Catherine, she talks about how it kind of, she realised that she had resources herself to be able to help heal herself, you know. And it's not saying that everyone that receives psychedelic assisted therapy is suddenly going to be able to, you know, not rely on anyone else to maintain their health or whatever. But I think that that's quite common in people. There's an empowerment within that sometimes for many people. I think that it's difficult to be told, oh, the hard work begins here by anyone. You know, nobody wants that, do they? But I do think, yeah, so through that, during, or sort of following those conversations, it was like, well, okay, well, what does the hard work look like? What kind of help do I need? And that really did help put me on a different therapeutic path. And it has been more, I felt a bit more empowered to be able to help myself. I do think that those sort of resources that I have within myself have been maybe, I don't think created, I think maybe they were always there, but I wasn't really fully able to appreciate them. Those have kind of been awakened during that process. I think for me, I needed a completely different approach. I asked the team, can you recommend any therapists that would be working more in line with sort of somatic therapies, you know, recommended during or before the trial that I read The Body Keeps the Score, and a lot of that made a lot of sense to me. A lot of that, I got to a point where I try to resolve the problems of thought with more thinking. Just, you know, it wasn't leading me anywhere good, and it was like, well, is there a different way forward at doing this body-based work? Has really, really helped me. But yeah, I mean, it's hard for it to be. In some ways, it's hard to acknowledge that maybe there isn't that one single answer out there that's suddenly going to go bang, and you're like, okay. I think what I've learned from this whole process is about having those many, many different tools to call upon at different times. But to say it's entirely, I still need help, I still need support, I still need community, I still need a therapist, I still, you know, it's not like I'm completely out there on my own now. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, I think it kind of does, and I think, but again, it's just trying to decide, or I was trying to figure out, like, sometimes there's a participant's willingness to want change prior to it, and how that influences how they recover afterwards, or do you find like an awakening during the trial in a sense? And from the sounds of it, it sounds like by you filling in those surveys, you were trying ready, and then when you were on the trial, it sounds like it helped you move along and figure out that you had the strength. But yeah, in addition to that, kind of, you touched upon some things as well. It's like, in terms of the support structure outside of things, I think it's well documented, like, you know, in terms of addiction and whatnot, like your support environment and the, you know, the cues you have outside of your in your normal world, how they affect your recovery. Like, how do you find going back to like your own bedroom, your own spaces, like the same places where those cues for your depression and things and whatnot were still kind of necessarily there? Because, you don't have to answer us, but did you find like actually maybe it would have been good to try have something and go into a new environment to try put new structures in place, or do you feel like it was easier to slip back into old routines because the cues that you had were still existing there? And that's something that's always quite interesting in terms of how we support things. In terms of Scandinavia, the work they do over there, which is quite interesting. And, a classical one is like the Vietnam War in terms of the GIs that were addicted to heroin and when they went back, 21% became re-addicted compared to during the war. So yeah, that's just something.
Yeah, I think that's the key role of integration, really, is about taking those lessons, those insights, epiphanies you might have had or whatever, and then applying them to your everyday life so that you do change your environment. Because if you don't do that, then yeah, it's very easy for if those if those issues are born out of those environmental factors and none of them change, well, yeah, you can still have an afterglow within that same container, but you are still going to end up being back to where you were before, maybe. I do think it can change your perception of your existing situation and environment. So they may change by virtue of that, if you know what I mean. Just because you've got a different way of looking at those circumstances or whatever. But yeah, I think that's for me, it's not, I know some people after a psychedelic experience sort of have a personal revolution and change everything, leave their job and get divorced and whatever. But I think for me, it's more about that kind of sustainable evolution after each experience, yeah, and implement those changes. And then hopefully you have an environment that is more conducive to your well-being. Yeah.
Maybe we can take the last couple of
Yeah,
questions that we're
sure.
waiting already.
It was just really briefly to say that earlier you said that in the integration group that it was important there would be no mental health professionals or anyone who's qualified. But sometimes mental health professionals or qualified therapists might actually have that therapy and might be in that group as a group member and not as a qualified professional. And do you see that as an exclusion
Yeah, I see a
criteria?
place for that as well. But if you have a peer support group, you can't have it goes beyond peer support to being a therapeutic environment. So this is because we did feasibility study and spoke to people that have held peer groups and also people that are from a therapeutic background that hold integration groups, etc. There's a place for both. As an organisation that is made up of people with lived experience, we have no professional therapeutic training. So at the moment, that's the path we're going down. So if you do have, this is something that we went through and we thought about for a very long time. We want this to be pure peer support run by peers. And that kind of sets the parameters of what people can expect from those groups. If as soon as you have somebody from a therapeutic background involved in that, even if it's somebody to escalate things to, then it makes people's expectations will be different. People's approach to the groups are sometimes different as well.
What if, for example, so I'm an art therapist, say that I had the treatment, was accepted on a trial, said I had, I'm often in my own therapy, so said it as my own therapy, and then would I then be excluded from being part of the peer if I approach it as a peer? What would that background
be a peer?
that's
you're
what I
not
mean.
providing you're not providing a professional service, if you like, within that space.
I guess I was just wondering the way that it was
If it's
presented
it
made me wonder if that would literally exclude people from that background, even if they come as a peer. And it was just
no, but if that person then started giving therapeutic advice during the session, then that would mean that they couldn't be there anymore because the group isn't. Those aren't the parameters. There are some fantastic integration groups out there that are run by, people with therapeutic experience, and they're amazingly brilliantly done.
I was thinking about taking off that hat. And
Yeah.
it's a bit of a, perhaps in the
Yeah.
explanation, it sounded, so I would have assumed that I would be excluded even as
No,
something that,
yeah,
from the way it was
yeah.
like explained, so I just wanted to.
Yeah, so even if people within the peer support group are giving advice to each other, you know, and it's prescriptive or whatever, again, we would have to step in and stop that as well. Because again, that's going beyond, it's really for people to come together, share their experiences and speak from the point of I rather than you. So yeah, but yeah, nobody with that background would be excluded, but if they kept trying to go into therapist mode, then you'd have to speak to them and say, look, this has to be, you know, the approach needs to be different. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Okay.
clarifying.
It's all right. It's a difficult question. I've hopefully navigated that okay, but yeah.
It's much clearer now.
Yeah.
I just-
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.